Hello and welcome to my patch notes rundown for the 5th of July. This week's patch notes introduces notable changes to the City of Senntisten spells. They also fixed a bug with emerald bolts that caused them to never activate, as well as reworking and buffing the effect. Without further ado, let's get right into it. Smoke Cloud has been added to borrow power. This update buffs range and melee since you're normally on Luna's spellbook. This allows players to cast Smoke Cloud without having to use spellbook swap, and this in turn saves players having to bring an extra rune pouch. The Smoke Cloud effectiveness has been reduced by 60% for ranged and melee. Critical hit cap changed from 112% to 104.8%, and critical hit damage changed from 15% to 6%. This spell isn't as effective with magic compared to range and melee, since it's much more difficult to breach the normal hit cap. The Trim Masterwork Armor's set effect will no longer be reduced by the Animate Dead spell. This is a pretty big nerf to the melee use of Animate Dead. As shown in this diagram, the Animate Dead buff would work with every bleed hit staggered by the Trim Masterwork Armor. In this unrealistic example, Animate Dead reduces the original hit by 100 damage, but 500 damage through the Trim Masterwork bleed. Practically, it wasn't 500% more effective as shown in this example, but more along the lines of being 100% more effective, which is still huge. The Enchanted Emerald Bolts effect has been adjusted. They no longer poison the target. They deal between 2 and 4% weapon damage as poison. Their damage now scales with poison modifiers. They have a base 55% chance of activating. Their bolts now have a 12.5% chance of being consumed on activation. So you're probably wondering how these newly buffed bolts fare against other meta bolts such as rubies, onyx, and hydrix. Well, the exact math around anything that deals poison damage is really complicated because of all the synergies, but I believe the conclusions are clear. These bolts are only very powerful if fully synergized against poisonable targets with the use of Cinderbane gloves and weapon poison. I would say that these bolts are only good against other type of bolts if you're not making use of the ruby or hydrix effects, and you don't need the healing from onyx. The other factor is that they're 4 times cheaper than onyx and 19 times cheaper than hydrix. A good example where these bolts can be very effective is AFK Gregorvik, where with this setup and bar you can achieve an average of 52 kills an hour. Slayer Masters are now able to assign Banshee tasks to players wearing the Mask of Mourning. Various locations will no longer clear skybox overrides when leaving and returning to the area. Rings and amulets will no longer prevent players from traveling to Intrana. It is no longer possible to carry over the Slayer Master's cape effect across multiple Slayer tasks. This was supposedly done by removing the Slayer Master cape when the perk activates. The Slayer Master will remember your perk activation, but at the same time the game won't recognize that you've used the perk activation on your cape since you're not wearing it. Fix an issue where certain familiar special attacks couldn't be used via the action bar. You still can't click the special attack on your action bar, but you can use a keybind. And that's it for this week's patch notes. I'm curious why they decide to buff Emerald Bolts. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a pretty well balanced buff. However, all these buffs to poison and critical hits makes me suspicious that the Elder God Wars rewards are going to be built around poison and critical hit mechanics. Anyways, that's it from me. Thank you for watching and take care.